Welcome to the Survivor Author Series. I want to really welcome you. We're very delighted that you're here today. This program is actually a part of the Patient Perspective Series program. We call it sometimes Healthcare from the Trenches. And we're really glad that you're here to witness our talk today with Ted Meyer and Dr. Suraiya Simi Rahman, who will be speaking to you, and I'll be introducing them to you formally in just a second. Before we begin, though, those of you who are attending virtually, I want to talk to you for a second. If you would like to ask questions towards the end, please use Q&A. Chat is disabled, so please do that, and we hope we have time to answer your questions. And for all of you who are here in person, a couple things. One is that you passed on the way in a table when you were checking in for the All of Us research study. This is an NIH program enrolling 1 million people by 2028. And the goal is to create a large, very large database to be used to advance precision medicine and also personalized prevention, healthcare prevention, not specific to cancer, but to the spectrum of healthcare. So on your way out, if you go out this door, please stop by, please take a look, please consider enrolling in this program. My family has been enrolled for several years now, and I recommend you take a look.
I am too.
And you are too, and there you go, Ted Meyer, you are too. I want to thank the supporters of this program, and that is, of course, Keck Medicine of USC, who has been a longtime supporter of this program that's been going on 11 years now, and also, of course, USC Norris Comprehensive Cancer Center, who has been very much involved in this program all along the way. Let me introduce you to Ted Meyer and Dr. Rahman, and we're really excited about this particular program because although most of the programs we do in the Patient Perspective Series are related to cancer, and cancer is often used as a metaphor for other things, like the big C, this time it's not. It's actually a different chronic illness, and in many ways, cancer is not the metaphor it usually is, and this disease is. But they're all very related in terms of the resilience that all of us who have had a chronic illness have striven for. So let me introduce to you Ted Meyer. Ted is an internationally recognized artist, curator, author, and patient advocate who spent much of his childhood in extreme pain with Gaucher disease, a potentially fatal enzyme deficiency affecting bones, joints, and organs. Ted has been featured on NPR and in the New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, and USA Today, and his artwork has been exhibited worldwide in museums, hospitals, and galleries. In his role as the artist in residence at USC, Keck School of Medicine, Ted curates exhibitions of artwork by patients whose subject matter coincides with the Keck School of Medicine curriculum. So welcome, Ted. We're really pleased to have you here. I know many of you know him from his work in the HEAL program at the Keck School of Medicine. Dr. Suraiya Simi Rahman is a board-certified pediatrician and clinical hospitalist with over a decade of procedural sedation experience. Dr. Rahman is a volunteer assistant professor of clinical medicine at the USC Keck School of Medicine, where she serves as a professional development coach for medical students. She's the co-founder and director of Pala Medicine in Pasadena, providing medical screening, integrative ketamine treatment services, and legal modalities of psychedelic therapies in the areas of mental health, healthcare worker burnout, and related areas of coaching. And welcome, Dr. Rahman. We're so pleased to have you here. So welcome. Thank you, Ted. Right before I do want to mention, at the end of this event, we will be having a very quick book raffle. There are 10 copies available. Please hold on to those tickets. It'll go really quickly. If you win a copy, you can have it signed by and you can schmooze the author. You can have it signed by the author at the check-in table right after this event, and even purchase a book if you don't happen to win through Venmo or Zelle. So we'll look forward to that. So please, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to invite you, Ted, to read from the prologue of this book. And I just have to say thank you so much. It's, I think, a fascinating book, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So with that.
So the prologue of the book is just sort of me, why I got into all of this. Because I had terrible experiences when I was a kid dealing with doctors. When you have something rare and you're stuck in a teaching hospital, you sort of become an object rather than a patient. So I'm going to start. I will also say one of my fears in life is reading out loud. So wish me luck. Teaching hospitals are the worst. Host of rare disease, I was a textbook made of skin and bones for every medical intern to read. No one asked my permission. Only 7 years old, I was there to be used by whoever came trampsing into my room. And come they did. I was an oddity, an artifact, a palpitation, a tumor, an irregular hormonal balance, a genetic carnival freak. I should have been under glass. Was I contagious? No, but no one talked to me, only about me. While napping, drawing in my sketchbook, or just recuperating, I'd be startled by a group of recently white-coated interns bursting into my room to poke and prod me like I was some sort of alien voodoo doll. Leading this band of torturers would be a seasoned attending physician with a silver clipboard that held his notes on the day's curiosities. He, and it was always a he back then, seemed indifferent to the annoyance of his intrusion. Learning was learning, and there was the right way, and there was his way. One day in 1965, the attending, puffing away on a cigarette, addressed a wall of future doctors. This patient has Gaucher's disease. What can you tell me about him? I possessed a huge spleen, one of the symptoms of Gaucher's disease. I looked like one of those starving kids you'd see on TV at 3 a.m., while a disembodied voice begged for 78 cents a day to change a life. It couldn't have been more obvious that something was going wrong inside of me. The minions remained silent. Eventually, the attending physician pointed to my enlarged gut and with his cigarette noted its abnormal size. Then, without asking me, he instructed each of the dozen students to tap on my stomach to get a sense of my problem. I felt like a melon at the supermarket, and during this tap, 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 he rambled off some fun facts about my potential fate. Skeletal abnormalities, anemia, clotting problems, avascular neurosis, neurological complications, cancer, and melanoma. This is so rare. He seemed almost joyful at my lack of a future. He won't live much past adulthood, is a comment no second grader should hear without follow-up counseling. That assault and a few others stuck in my head over the years. How could a big hospital allow this behavior? How could a doctor be so blind to the effects his words would have on a child? Pissed off, I continued living, a fact that I would love to rub into old Doc Cigarette's face had we ever crossed paths again. Of course, he'd be ancient now, and given his smoking, he's probably dead. Being sick gave me an interesting perspective for observing the world around me. These stories in the book are my observations as I remember them, but I was on a lot of painkillers at the time. I made it through.
So as a pediatrician, this story really hits me, and as a medical educator, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find myself back in that room, probably guilty of some form of that. Tell me what compelled you, or what motivated you to write this book?
Well, that experience, that's not that one experience, but a number of them at different hospitals, different teaching hospitals, they just stuck with me all these years. And as I grew up, every time I went to the hospital, I would know that because I had something rare, everybody would come in and sort of like, oh, it's the freak show. Let's see what this is. And then when I got older and I had been realizing that my life was sort of unusual because I had been very sick and treatment was developed by the time I was about 40, and now I'm pretty normal. I kept looking back on that and thinking, well, with this extra time I've been given, is there any way I can change the dialogue in medical education? And I thought, well, I love art. I have this knowledge of the medical system. And I've also, at the time, had been working on a big project that's been going on for 25 years, documenting people's scars. So I'd heard story after story of good and bad bedside manner. And I thought, well, how can I combine those all together into something that could help future doctors look at their patients as people? And that's how I landed up here. I happened to find a boss, Dr. Schaff, who, through you, who believes in the idea of using art as a way to teach doctors about patient experience. So it just all fell into place.
Amazing. And that's how we first met, yeah, was actually starting to follow the kernels of that idea. And then, as a medical educator, I'm always aware that the place we start from is what's the gap here? Whenever you're in a situation like what's the gap, and you identified that gap, even as a 6-year-old, you can be in a hospital room and go, there's something wrong with the way we do things here, and I'm going to fix it. And you got the opportunity to fix it, and you got the opportunity to step out of that perspective of somebody with a terminal illness now given a lease of life, and you just went for it, you know. And I just love how this book is such a crystallization, because it stays true to your voice as a child. I just love that as a pediatrician. Like I'm totally with you when you're making the jokes about the hospital food, and the way things look, and looking at it from what it looks like from a child's perspective.
Well, as a kid, you remember the food stunk, and there's one story in here where I got in a lot of trouble because I wrote on the menu, "This food stinks," thinking I would get better food, and that didn't happen.
It was your first Yelp reviews.
Yeah, my first Yelp review, "This food stinks." And things like you remember the colors of the wall, that hospital green. It was like every hospital, oh, why is this the same boring thing? And just being told it's calming. And I would think it's depressing, you know. Yeah. So you have these memories from a kid's view that just never went away.
Absolutely. And keeping that voice alive throughout, I wanted to kind of jump into, just even the first story is called Karma, and just thinking about, the hospital experience that you had, which was of being in the hospital for long periods of time, kind of getting to know the insides of a hospital, almost like, yeah, you were in espionage, child, going inside a hospital. And I kind of share that because I grew up with parents who were physicians, and I've always have felt really comfortable inside a hospital. And you're absolutely right. There are just things about it which are so iconic.
Yeah. And
they spell hospital, but do they spell healing? Do they denote healing? So tell me how that experience was so different for you. Just say, let's say you were in there for 3 days.
Well, since I was a repeat customer I grew up outside New York, but there was a smaller local hospital. And things were different back then. The way they would staff the hospital with a group of nurses who would stay there for years. They weren't jumping from hospital. Whoever paid the best. So really, I joke in the book that I had staying power. I would see these people. I wasn't like a loser kid who broke his leg and was there for 2 days. I would be there, and then 3 months later I'd be back, and I'd see the same nurses, and they sort of watch me grow up. And I had this gaggle of women internationally. Jamaica, there were a lot of them from Ireland back then. Poorer countries in Europe would come to New York to be nurses, and it was it was like a family in a way. It wasn't like when I've been to the hospital as an adult and you don't really know everybody's name and things like that. So the whole system was different back then.
Absolutely. I trained in the Bronx, and this happened in New Rochelle. So, I know exactly the kind of environment you're talking about. It really does have that kind of space. So it was you were 6, you had the dimples, you were set.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned that the dimples could get me extra jello at night.
Right. So tell me about that. You really learned to work the system.
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, because they knew me, I mean, it really was sort of like family. So they wanted to be nice to me. And you would, one of the stories in there, I talk about one of the nurses who I refer to as like a softie. And you got to know who were the nurses that were going to stick to the rules, who would let you stay up a little bit later at night and keep your TV on and things like that. So it's like any family, you know who's going to let you get away with things and who aren't. And as a repeat customer, I got away with more than the kids who just came in.
Yeah, I love that when you were a teenager, that involved finding the cute girl, going to her room, having a chat with her, and the nurses weren't having it. They had rules around it.
Yeah, well, you had to go back to your room, but it was more our parents. So this is somebody who had been in my high school or my junior high I'd never met, and who had spinal meningitis, and I just kept hearing there's this girl down the hall, she's really, really sick. But eventually I could visit her, so we would hang out and watch TV at night, and I mean the things you do when you're a young kid. But it was the room, there was a 2-bedroom and the room next to her, so I would stay in that bed all day. But our parents, who would commiserate all day about like, oh, they almost died, so we'll let them stay in the room, they were very adamant, like, you're going back to your room at night. Not that anything would have happened. We're like,
you could just feel the teenage hormones in the air.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I feel when I read that story. I feel the teenage hormones in the air, like you've encapsulated that moment in everybody's life, right? When you just discover that the opposite sex exists. Whoa. And you happen to be in a hospital, but that didn't stop it. That life will go on and kids will grow and develop. And I think that's so apparent in this book. And I think as a pediatrician and for trainees, kind of trying to just kind of get into a disease like Gaucher's or anything like it. There's so many out there, and really kind of understanding like what's it like to be this person.
Right? Aside from this book, I've done some work at Shriners with the burn kids, and there a lot of them come every year for the summer. They're again repeat kids, and they've watched each other grow up. And you go there and they have terrible burns on their faces and expanders and all these things, but they're used to seeing each other. So when you go in there, they're just saying like they're 13 and 14-year-old kids stuck in a hospital together, and they're flirting with each other. They're just being kids and developing just in a different place.
Yeah. And I think that brings to light also just that nursing in those kind of conditions, right, for those kind of kids. Like, we never talk about that's part of nursing too, is to be part of that family that is around these kids, that allows them that safe space to explore themselves and develop these essential parts of themselves that otherwise can stay constricted. And I think that's just so beautifully demonstrated here in this book that I think I want to recommend this to like every pediatrically, inclined trainee. Because it's like, here's what it's like to go through life with this, of course, these stories and these conditions, but also to bring humor, to see the absurd, and also how clearly you remember so many of these instances and how beautifully demonstrated. But Gaucher's is not the same for everyone.
No, there's very severe cases where people die very young, 2-3 years old, and then there's cases where people don't get diagnosed until late in life. So I had a very large spleen. I had bone problems, bone infarctions when I was about 6. So, and I would be in the hospital for a while, and then I'd have a month where I'd be fine, and then I'd be back in the hospital. So it was this bouncing back and forth between having a normal life and a hospital life.
And then there's the experience of that you had, and then your brother also with the same disease.
Different symptoms completely. He didn't have the bone problems. He had muscle involvement, and then later on in life developed Parkinson's and landed up dying from that.
Yeah, you described that episode so beautifully, because the learning from this illness and wellness and how you step between the two kingdoms almost, right? And is informed so much by the effect of this. Do you call it disease? Do you call it illness? Which one? Because your dad calls it.
My dad did not like the word disease,
Yeah.
so he would always call it a syndrome, which I never really sounds to me just as bad.
Right.
So I don't
like
really,
an evil superhero.
Yeah.
But right, so you kind of step between the two worlds, and then you also recognize the impacts of it on your mother, on your father, and on your brother.
That was one thing writing the book, because my mom and I had a really contentious relationship, and I think it's normal, and you probably see this more in pediatrics, where she was so protective of me growing up that during the periods when I was healthy, she didn't want me doing anything because I might get hurt, I might land up back in the hospital, and my feeling was like, I'm a kid, I want to ride my bike, I want to play baseball, I want to do things. So, and as I got older, it was the same thing. I wanted to travel. I would jump on an airplane and go anywhere. I didn't care. She was like, don't go to India, don't go to Africa, don't go all these places. But as I was writing the book and realized how much of my mom's life was as a caregiver, she took care of her mom. She took care of my dad when he got dementia. She took care of my brother and I. And then there was this little respite where everybody was healthy for about a year, and then my brother starts getting Parkinson's. And so really, almost her entire life, she was a caregiver. And until I started writing about her history, it never really occurred to me, like, all the sacrifice she had made. She was just my overbearing mom.
Yeah, as a child, that's what we see. But yeah, writing gives you such a window into that reflection of seeing the person in their entirety. So I appreciate even more that the amount of nuance and depth that's gone into the stories.
I mean, the other thing is writing this, and again, this is probably something you see a lot, how one person's illness affects the whole family. It affects the brothers who have the illness, it affects brothers who don't have it. As a sick person, you suck up all the energy in the room, and the healthy people in the family can sort of feel ignored by that. And, there's a whole dynamic for being sick, and then there's a whole dynamic for being healthy and being a caregiver, and,
Absolutely, and how that impacts illness and well-being, and how that impacts just even the experience of both those things, positive or negative, and you can relate to that. The kind of next thing I wanted to segue into is like, how is medicine back in the day? Because these stories, when I read them, I get transported, and that's why I really recommend, just picking up the book. I get transported to a time and a place very concretely. It's New York, it's the 50s and 60s. Life makes its way in, and it's so encapsulated. So I feel like I'm seeing a child's narrative, which as a pediatrician, a child's illness narrative, as we would call it, right, in narrative medicine, but with the perspective of the old Jewish guy with the jokes.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really special narrative for that reason, and I really love it even more. So tell me a little bit about how the world has changed within healthcare, from that time.
Well, first of all, the building that I used to go to, there's no way that building is still certified as a hospital. It's sort of like county here, where people can't go in it and use it as a hospital anymore. The main thing, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is the interaction with the doctors, because you didn't have the insurance companies back then telling everybody they've got 15 minutes with a patient maximum, that's it. And like in my case, it used to be I would go to the doctor and they would walk in with a folder, a bunch of folders this big, and they would sit there and they would start going through it while they're talking to you, like, oh, did you see the Met game? Did you can you ride a bike? Do this, but the whole time they're looking at it. And now they sort of look at your charts outside the room on a computer, they walk in, they go right to it. sometimes while you're telling them, how are you feeling? Oh yeah, I feel like shit. He feels like shit. And they write it right while you're in there. They're not really listening to you. They're not interacting with you. So even the simple stuff of like going over your files used to be a time to connect with the doctor. And like I had a GP back then who had never heard of this disease because nobody had at the time where I was diagnosed. There were only a couple hundred known cases. He took the time. He learned about it. This is pre-internet. He had to find books and experts at NIH and people doing studies. And he really took the time for this one crazy patient with this one crazy illness. And I'm not sure how that would play out now because, partially you can Google everything. But he almost became like a family member.
Absolutely. It's such a rare condition. And as pediatricians, you may go your entire life without seeing a case of it, but also hard to detect. But now due to so much research, it's picked up in the newborn screen. So kids are likely to be detected much earlier. You had a delayed diagnosis,
Yeah, I got diagnosed so I was diagnosed when I was 6. My brother who had it had been misdiagnosed with something else. And then when I got diagnosed, they went back and re-diagnosed him. So things were a little squishy back then as far as diagnosis.
And then you went to the NIH over the years, really participated in the research that then made the cure possible.
Yeah, so NIH has been doing a study for a while now about siblings who have this disease with all the same genetic markers, and why am I still alive? Well, my brother had this horrible last decade of his life and then dying from Parkinson's. So, and I mean, luckily for me, they have not found anything yet. They haven't found anything that says I'm going to get this illness. But genetically, I should. We have all the same markers, so we don't know what's going on with that. But that was part of my parents' whole thing of, this is a bad situation, but if you give back, it'll help somebody else. And that's sort of part of why I landed up at Keck too.
Yeah, so what a beautiful way for that, that culture that you grew up in, which is that you give back, and then the gift coming back to you, this opportunity. And yeah, I hope we're hearing this, that the same genetic disease with the exact same markers can present completely differently in siblings, right? Is an astounding, I think, just recognition that nowadays we do a lot of diagnostics and everything like that, but are we missing what the experience of an illness is, how somebody, you were a different person than your brother. You handle it differently. Like, you've also handled this idea that all your life you were going to die, and you never planned for anything else after that. And when you got a new lease on life, you had to really quickly change and shift gears.
Yeah. Well, one of the things Simi and I have talked about a lot is this whole idea that I was given this life where I was sick, and then through this modern miracle of NIH, which who knows what's happening with that this week, and all the test results for all these studies we've all been part of. But I was given this new lease on life, and I have a reverse of most people. I started out using a wheelchair, I started out using crutches, and then I became really healthy. And people kept saying to me, you should talk about that, that's not normal. And there's so many times in my life, and they're not in here, but you know about them, where people have said something to me that really resonated. And when I thought, oh, my life is different. It was just the life I was living, so it didn't occur to me that it was different from anybody else. And it's the same thing, the story about the artist. There was when I was a kid, there was somebody who was a volunteer at the hospital, and I'm drawing my little drawings of spaceships or whatever they were. But she knew I hated being in the hospital. And this volunteer, before their art therapist, said, if you don't like it here, you can draw the fact that you don't like it here. And that completely changed my life at 8 or 9 years old. Because every once in a while, someone says something that so resonates with you You're like, oh, they're seeing something about me that I'm not seeing. And these people who kept saying to me, well, you should talk about your life because it's different and you have a different perspective because of it. Like that never occurred to me because I was just like, I can walk again.
And that idea, right, is now expressing itself with the patient artists that you curate, that you've really built a space for and opened up that area for, where people who have chronic illnesses and life-threatening illnesses and our artists as well can really communicate the experience of that. And that to me just feels so human. Like when I walk down, the CAM building is where Ted hangs the artists' artwork from like every quarterly, right? And we've been doing it for like
5 shows a year.
5 shows a year for the last 8
years.
years. And every time I walk through there, I just feel enveloped by curiosity. It pulls me in. Kind of beauty, of course, cleverness, and just the creativity that is really at the heart of medicine, which is an art and a science, right?
What's so amazing about here, being at this school and being in this HEAL program, there are artists all over the world doing artwork about their illnesses. There's people just doing amazing work about heart transplants and cystic fibrosis and emphysema, you name it. There are artists doing work about it, but they don't have a place to show it. And this school, in this gallery here, gives me the opportunity to show this work that most galleries won't show. And I always joke, like, no one wants a picture about your colonoscopy over their couch, but I will show that work. If you have colon cancer, I will show that work because I find a beauty in it, and it tells a story, and I find it much more interesting than an abstract or just a landscape that's been done a million times, since the Middle Ages of like, here's a cow out in the field. I would much rather have a heart transplant. So people all around the world Google like artwork about illness, and this gallery and this school and I show up, and they write me, and I'm doing work about my transplant, or whatever, you want to give me a show. And because they're not going to show it at a gallery. Nobody's going to buy that work at a gallery.
And this platform that's arrived also allows the medical community, right? You've opened up the space within the heart of a medical school, and now you've said, oh, we're going to host medical students, and we're going to bring their professors in to talk to the artist, whose art is about the system that the professor teaches in. Mm-hmm. And so you're sitting there just kind of really getting this educational experience, which is humanizing and making real what they're learning in their lectures. And I think that's the challenge of learning, right? It's just like, these are real people. These are real people with real lives that we're doing science for, and how do we hold on to that?
And this all goes back to that first experience with the doctors tapping on my stomach when I was a kid, because I don't want that to happen to another kid. So my hope is that when I show artwork here by somebody with my illness or any illness, and the med students hear them talk about it, they will think, oh, this is a complete person. They are not just their hormone levels. They're not just their illness. They are people who are, because of this illness, have a whole different outlook on life. They are creating artwork that would not have happened had they been healthy. They have a whole different way of imagery and thinking and putting paint on canvas that wouldn't have happened if they were healthy. So my hope is that the next time all these med students do their rounds and they land up in someone's room, they might say to them, how are you, before they start tapping away. One of my favorite things, one of the artists, and I can't remember which one, was telling me how he had been in the hospital his whole childhood, and he said, it was a boy, and he said, just one time I thought a doctor would say to me, hey, what's your favorite dinosaur? Because all kids have a favorite dinosaur. And he goes, it never happened, So it would just be nice for the interns to think about that once in a while and think, This is a complete person. This is a kid developing just like any kid on the outside. He probably likes dinosaurs. He probably likes baseball, whatever. So I just wanted to bring it all around and make them realize, we're not just our illnesses.
That's a, thank you for that reminder and for displaying it so, I think, descriptively and beautifully with a lot of humor. So I find myself and I love how each of these stories is just enough to kind of, and I start giggling. I really do when I'm reading certain pages because your turn of phrase is just so
Thanks.
and you know, so thank you for the work you've put into this and into all of the things that have brought together this moment of learning from human experience.
And I think anybody who is a long-term patient could write this book. I mean, and probably, the stories would be different, but it would be the same sort of outlook. And we just had a young woman who suffers from possible sudden cardiac arrest be one of the artists. And to hear her talk, her knowledge of her illness was so amazing. And any of these long-term patients, they learn so much about the human condition, but also technically, medically, dosages, treatments, all the research happening. And so it's the idea of being a long-term patient is not just you sitting there and a doctor coming at you and telling you what to do. A lot of times the patients know as much, as the doctors.
I can attest to that. And what that expertise means, right? You're not going to find that expertise anywhere else condensed for you. So just a note to learners, as a medical educator, this is kind of what would be my little, kind of stand that I would get on, is that no two diagnoses of asthma are the same. Their experience of the same disease is going to be different. And so just by being curious about it, you learn so much, not just about the person, but also the condition that you're learning about, because it can turn up in different ways, And so I think what we're getting at is that the patient narrative is really central to just the experience of the illness, the way that whatever episodes happen are then created into meaning, right? What meaning do we make out of it? And then how does that drive us? And which way does it go? And everywhere that you've inserted the characteristic humor and this understanding of the absurdity of life, I think that is what keeps bringing me back to this book. It's just like, I know I'm gonna just because you do this, right? Like, I haven't told you this as a friend, but it is incredible, right? Like, I mean, does everybody agree? Like, this is an incredible life that we're getting to witness, and the kind of humility and even just the kind of like, it's just, kind of just like, well, this is how it is.
Yeah.
Deep level of acceptance.
There's no way out there's only one way out. And I didn't want to take that one. So another thing I want to talk about is, and we didn't get into it here, but you and I have talked about it a lot, is when you're a long-term patient, or even you remember your doctors and they might not remember you. And that's another thing that I try to work on with, or at least mention to the med students. Like, a long time ago, I had both hips replaced the same day. I don't know why I thought, oh, this is a good idea. I'm going to do both hips the same day so I don't have to go to the hospital twice. And when I said to the doctor, could you do them both in one day? He said, sure, I can do them both. So I didn't want to go in twice. We did them both. And then once I had the operation done and I tried to stand up, I was like, why the hell did this doctor tell me he could do this? Now, he probably has no idea who I am if I walked up to him. He did 2 sets of hips a day, 10 a week, couldn't remember anybody, but I will remember him for the rest of my life, because he didn't say to me, it's going to be really painful when you're done to try to rehab, And so many things that you guys do regularly and you see over and over again that is routine to you could be the biggest single thing that ever happens in our life once. And and you can talk about this better than me, but there's such a difference in dynamic between, like, the probable outcomes, how rehab is going to go. But for us, going through the one major thing we don't know, and it's scary, we panic, it's a whole different dynamic. And you're looking at us going, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And we're looking at you going, you did this to me.
Yeah. I'm here because of you, and I'm really mad.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful reminder of, how much of an impact that human connection, that real care that people can have really matters, and not to lose that. Since this is a series on survivorship, do you consider yourself
It's interesting because people use that term, but I'm a survivor because NIH came up with a drug to keep me alive. So again, it was just a matter of, oh, look, this popped up before I died. It popped up before what happened to my brother happened to me. So in that respect, yes. Mentally, I feel, because people are always saying to me, oh, you had such a weird life, you had a rough childhood, it should have been. But my parents never treated me like I was sick. They were like, my mom over worried, but my dad was like, try to do whatever you can do. And I think there's something about, especially if you're sick as a kid, if people don't tell you you have a really bad situation, you don't realize you have a really bad situation. So I never really felt it. And I never thought about that a whole lot until I was in Prague and I went to one of the camps, and there's all this artwork by kids, and they're playing with a ball. There's a sun up in the sky. They're doing kid artwork. It's the same as the burn kids at Shriners. They're just being kids and in a terrible situation, but they're still drawing the sun and a ball. And as a kid, even if you're in a lot of pain, which I was sporadically, but the other times I was still just a kid. So survivor, yeah, because the medicine kept me alive, but also because my parents didn't keep saying to me, you got screwed in life, and I had been to patient meetings where, I know you and I had a great conversation about this once, where the parents were like, oh, my kid has it worse than you did, your kid. It was like this competition of whose kid had to suffer more for this illness, and my parents were not buying into that. They were like, we don't want to hear you complain.
And that resilience built, and that childlike perspective, which is like, hey, I've got a crayon, I've got some paper, I'm pretty good. There's Soupy sales on the TV, and we're gonna be all right. Soupy
made everything good.
Well, I think we're gonna switch now to Q&A. This feels complete on the raffle.
We are not going to be using microphones for Q&A because we've got mics in the ceiling. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and ask directly. And I have some people online who've actually made some comments. And neither of them are questions, it's just comments. So anyone have questions?
You touched briefly on it, but the political situation now with NIH and all of that. And so could you say a little bit more about this drug that they discovered and that made such a huge difference for you? Let's send your book to somebody's college.
So I gave bone marrow when I was 7 years old or 6 years old at NIH. And I was told, oh, eventually there will be a treatment. It was always a matter of just be patient. I always joke, I was told I had to be a patient. Like, be patient, the treatment will come. And it finally arrived when I was about 38. So 36 years, something like that, 32 years from the time I gave bone marrow. Originally, it was an enzyme replacement I got every 2 years. Costs $250,000 a year. Thank you, NIH for that. And now it's a pill. So they figured out how to give me a pill. So I take a pill every night now. But for 18 years, I got an IV every 2 weeks. And I would feel great for about 11 days, and then it would sort of taper off. And now the pill tends to work better. But this is a drug, and we have someone here who used to work for the drug company who could probably be more specific, but NIH developed it, and then they, I guess, leased it. They let Genzyme, a company, do the final trials. And then Genzyme put it on the market at an incredibly expensive amount because this was a brand new idea of marketing these drugs to small populations at really, really high amounts, which has stuck. So now there's a lot of drugs that are even more expensive than that. But it works, and I'm here. So thank you, taxpayers. Yeah.
How do you think having a sibling that also had this really rare disease affected your experience? Or would you, I don't know, because you don't have any other experience.
Well, I had one who had it and one who didn't.
Okay.
And the one who had it dealt with it completely differently. He never talked about it. And I was always, I think part of it because he had it in his muscles, so he would, but I was always on crutches. I went through elementary school on crutches, on and off. And so everybody saw it on me, and I just incorporated it. I never felt like ashamed about it. It was this very rare illness. When, like I was saying, when I was diagnosed, they knew of 250 cases, and now there's about 6,000 or 7,000 people on treatment around the world. So I thought, oh, I have this really rare thing, and it's kind of unique. My brother would not talk about it, and even as he got weaker and weaker, his friends had no idea what was going on with him because he never wanted to talk about it. So I don't really know why. And then the other brother, I think later on in life, he developed diabetes, and he was always talking about how he didn't feel well and had to, and sometimes I sort of wonder whether us getting so much attention when we were little led to him getting sicker later on in life and sort of wanting that attention back, because he really he was the brains in the outfit. He went to Cornell, and he never really got the due in the family that he should have. Yeah.
Do you ever speak to family? You had that experience with your mother and protective. Do you ever speak to family groups where you sort of say, let kids be kids? Yes, they have this illness or disease, but they're also kids.
Yeah. No, I do. I mean, if anybody, I'll go anywhere to talk. And
what's the response that you get from
it's sort of, well, this would probably be almost a better question for you, but I think if the parents are overprotective, they're going to say, oh yeah, they can be a kid, but they can't, we have to wrap them in bubble wrap before they go out. What do you find?
Yeah, I mean, as a pediatrician, I think we face this question quite a lot. And I think it's an opportunity for the parents to even just recognize, like, what is my response to my child being this ill, right? Like, had your mother had that kind of support group where they could kind of think about, like, oh, what part of me is being overprotective of Ted and not letting him go out, and is it safe to let him go out? So just even how much I think patient, what do you call it, like kind of support for families and patients has really like shifted into, like, we used to treat asthma very differently before, and now your pediatrician will say, no, your asthma should be so well controlled that you can go out and do everything that a normal kid can do. And I think that's a very powerful statement to me. So just recognizing when a child is diagnosed, when they're going through something like, it could be a chronic illness that's very common. And so the things, oh, don't go out, don't play, don't get ill, but also to recognize that our goal should be not to prevent the illness, the goal should be the normal life that can continue and develop. And so that's the way I think we pediatrics think about it, is what is holding a child back from developing and what is allowing that natural development to progress. That's kind kind of been the place where you always ask that question. Is what we're doing really helping?
I want to also say, while my mom was very protective, my dad was always, anytime I was in the hospital, he was like, look at these kids around you, they're worse off. So he always made a point of going, yeah, you're bad, but it could be worse. And when I think of, and I know there's probably a couple people who have Gaucher's zooming in at the moment, and they have children that are much worse off than I was. And I see, every once in a while you talk about that imposter syndrome, and here I am being like this advocate for knowledge and thing, and then I look at what they go through as families, and our family did not have it hard compared to some of these other families. So, I can't just say to them, oh, let your kid be kid, because a lot of them can't get out of bed. A lot of them are on respirators and things, but they're still going to be kids, and they will find some joy, I think. But, there's lots of kids out there with different things. And again, you can speak to this. As science gets better, there's a lot of kids alive now who wouldn't have been. And that's the whole moral dilemma. Are we saving them to have a good quality of life, or are we just saving them? So I don't try to second guess anybody else. I only write about my family.
But you allow such a beautiful window into these kind of experiences, right? On different scales, in which this question comes up. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the title of the book and why you decided on it?
Yeah. So, as Simi was saying, a lot of the stories are very funny. So this is about me going into Cedars to have the hip replacements, and I don't want to give the whole thing away, but they just kept saying, do you have requests? Do you have room? And I kept naming people who died in the hospital, saying, I want the room Sinatra died in. They're like, oh, we can't tell you what room that was. I want the room George Burns died in. Oh, we can't tell you. So, because I was just screwing with them. Because you go over and over again, you get readmitted in the hospital. They have all that information in the computer, but they have to go through it all the time. And sometimes you're just like, I don't want to deal with this. So that's the title. That's what it's about.
Inside joke.
It's the inside joke.
But I love it. The room Sinatra died in and other medically adjacent stories. It sounds like we're in the room next door,
Yeah.
listening to those stories. So well done.
We have a few comments from online, and I just want to share. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sure I cut someone off here. Teresa Sweeney says, your parents who clearly learned resilience passed that resilient spirit on to you. It's one of the most important human qualities. Sandra Carter, would you say that having a positive attitude helped you with your illness, and how would you have helped someone else who is down and very disgruntled with their situation?
Yeah, so I will say that when I was younger and was in pain a lot, I was not in a good mood. I am not was not the cheerful person you see in front of you now. And I was angry a lot, and there was a certain point where, and this is another one of those times where somebody said something to me like, you like to argue, you like to be in a bad mood. And initially I was angry because I was in a bad mood. And then I thought, oh, this person's right. I waste a lot of energy being angry. And then I spent a decade, every time I would want to be angry or lash out, thinking, there's got to be another way to react. So the resilient part came in with just sort of thinking, is there another way rather than being angry? I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
I think so. Resilience comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. Thank you so much. Shapes and sizes. And those of you who are here because you have some sort of relationship with cancer are going to be hearing, you've noticed how many similar things are touched on. The resilience we need to get through a cancer diagnosis and waiting for that moment when that particular drug that you've been waiting for comes through. I'm not the only one who got verklempt when you were speaking about that, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Simi Rahman.
I wanted to say happy birthday to Ted, who turns 67 tomorrow. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ted. Happy Happy birthday to you. And many more.
Thank you.
Cha cha cha.